All right, folks, welcome back to the Caddyshack podcast. This is episode number 9, and I think we can count. We're still looking for episode 8, but it's out there somewhere. We'll eventually find it. But moving on, wanted to welcome everyone back to the show. Like normal, we just kind of start things off with a little bit of news. So Barlas, always ask you about kind of just some Caddyshack news, what's going on in the world, what are you working on, what's happened, and what are you planning for as we head into reinvent season?
Couple things. So first, I wanted to show you what my son gave me. And he knows how much I love goats, and I want to have those goats that pass out when you yell. And I want to wake up every morning and just jump outside and then have them all knock over. Except this one makes noises. Yeah. So my favorite new thing. Second, I'd like to talk about what we're rolling out in Q1 of next year. It is formalized or in the process of being formalized, but it's up on the website on caddyshack.com. It is the CAD Academy, Cloud Alliance Director Academy. And it is based off of Michael Musselman's ideas and Brett's ideas and my ideas, and then the 420 members of Caddyshack and the things that we learn on best practices on how to become successful partners with AWS. And it will be a 6-hour hybrid course online and have a test at the end. Must be a Caddyshack member to do the test. And if you pass the test at 70% or better within 48 hours after you take the course, you'll get a certification as being a certified CAD from Caddyshack. And AWS will be talking about that and what they're going to give you for that in the future. We can't get into that, but it is coming. So if you want to learn about it, go to caddyshack.com, CAD Academy, and that's basically what we're doing with that. Re:Invent is coming up with Feminine Tech. Yesterday, Mission sent out the invite to anyone who would listen about Ludacris. They're having their concert the day after us. We're doing Salt and Pepper the day before on the 28th. So if you're lucky enough to be sent a ticket from one of our sponsors, then we'd love to see you there. That's going to be awesome with Rachel Mushawar, who's going to be giving away money to Girls That Code on stage. And then we'll have a great old time enjoying ourselves in Vegas. So there's that. Caddyshack members, of course, like we do every year, will have a Sunday night event and dinner, and they'll be able to come at no cost to them. All right, that's basically all I have. Let's move on to our guests.
Yeah, so kicking off the show, super exciting episode for me, and we'll get into all of that stuff. But wanted to welcome our guest today, Trevor Milestone. So Trevor, go ahead and give yourself a quick intro, kind of your background world, and then we can kind of get into lessons learned, what security does, superpowers, all that fun stuff that I think, over time we've laid out the foundation, but now we get to apply it and get to learn from others who are now applying this. And since we're all a little different, we all do different things, it's very relevant for the audience. So
yeah, absolutely. So if you can become a certified CAD through 6 hours of courses, I have to have a PhD, having worked under the Silver Fox himself. But yeah, Trevor Milestone, currently with Securiti.ai, used to work with Mike, and I'll get into that. Do you guys want the short background or the long-winded background that has maybe some relevance?
I want to know, what got you into technology? What were you doing?
Oh.
Let me preface this also, I didn't know either one of you guys 2 years ago, and me or 2.5 years ago, me and Brett were walking through re:Invent, and Trevor, you grab Brett and you're like, "Hey Brett, what are you doing? I haven't talked to you forever." And then all of a sudden the Silver Fox walked up and all you guys were geeking out on security, and I was like, I'm not in security anymore, and I was feeling left out. But now I'm glad that we're all BFFs. But yeah, that was I'll remember that day forever.
I was just as left out. That was Brett and Mike geeking on security. Different levels of knowledge there. But if you want to know how I got into technology, first job out of college, I went to work at Macy's, their executive development program. This is the corporate, not in the retail space, but I was on the e-commerce team. And Macy's, institutional, old school reseller. Yeah, great brand, great company. and I remember, e-commerce business, we have all of the data. We can see where things are going. And I remember our executives used to come in, and they'd be like, listen, people have to touch and feel the product, right? They weren't too worried about, online retail, about e-commerce. And, meanwhile, I'm here looking at the data, and it's sort of a leading question, but you want to guess who our biggest competitor was? And this is years ago, who Macy's biggest competitor was at that time?
Amazon.
It was Amazon. I was like, this is, I don't know if this is the industry I'm going to build it in right now, not today. But so yeah, I made the leap. I moved from New York to San Francisco, and, some stops in between, but, I was working at a company called Evident.io. Evident was really the first solution, the CSPM compliance space. People are just starting to move to AWS. It was very early, and having a great time there. And then all of a sudden, Palo Alto Networks comes along and makes their first acquisition of what would be many in a future acquisition spree of what is now Prisma Cloud. So acquired Evident, then acquired companies like RedLock and Twistlock and PeerSec and Aporeto. And I was on the Prisma Cloud team, moved to Chicago, took on a field sales role with this Prisma Cloud org. And as this industry kind of, matured, there was this organic kind of symbiosis between, hey, we're securing the cloud, we're working with these companies to, on their AWS environments, doesn't it make sense to align with them? So that started to happen. It wasn't happening widely. It was hardly a best practice. It was more of a one-off situation. And then fast forward where all this comes full circle. So in the central US, we're at a QBR in Austin, Texas. Funny enough, the same QBR that Brett, the Cloud Thor, was at from a partner perspective. And I'm going to give Andrew Nilsson a shout out here, but a guy from AWS by the name of Andrew Nilsson came in and presented to us. And he was talking about all the things AWS can do from a partner perspective. Yeah. And, we're like, this is great. I think one of the follow-up questions was, awesome. So how many of you are there? And he's like, one. Is that just for Palo? Just for security? No, one. For the thousands of partners in AWS ecosystem, there was one ISM, right? So this was very early stage, but it became sort of a gateway into, how we could partner with AWS teams. And as we continued to grow that Prisma Cloud business, we started working more and more with these AWS teams. And you can start to see a real synergy there. So, naturally, I found my way onto the AWS team at Palo. And it got there, I was excited. I had no idea what I was really getting into. And it was sort of a now what situation, right? Now we have Caddyshack that didn't exist then. There's tons of structures and formulas and systems and best practices and ways to build a partnership with AWS and do it the right way. This didn't exist then, right? I was scrambling, running around, getting connections to anybody from AWS that I could, just trying to figure out what they care about, how they're gold. Needless to say, through all that detective work, it didn't take a rocket scientist to understand that marketplace was going to be critical to getting access, right? And there's a lot more that goes into this partnership than marketplace, but that was ground zero and we had to figure it out. So, all right, we got that solved. Now we got to get people to start transacting that direction, right? How do we, get a behemoth that is Palo to completely change the way they do business? It should be pretty easy, right? It was not, right? And we finally got a strategic rep on board, did a transaction through Marketplace, and it was an absolute utter disaster. And not necessarily because of AWS, just because of, the way this company had transacted in the past. You think about a portfolio of products, a lot of acquisitions. There were products that were on Marketplace, products that weren't. There were products that required disties to be involved, products that couldn't have a distie involved. It was just a complete mess. And, it was clear that this wasn't scalable and it wasn't going to work across the board. So I think, stepping back, because we were still so new in this AWS partnership, I didn't have the metrics and goals. If you look at what a CAD's aligned on today, we didn't have any of that. So for 4 to 5 months, I kind of shifted into an operational role, right? I wasn't doing anything in the field. We had to figure out Marketplace. So you think about, revenue recognition and bookings and software release management, the distie involvement, right? Channel partner credit. There were so many things that went into transacting, and we had to work across all those teams internally to figure out a method to get these things through Marketplace. So that's what we did. We got it to a point where it was operational. We actually worked with Allison Johnson's team, the CPPO team, pretty closely, and we started to transact. From there, it was back to the
Love
enablement, back
Allison
to the
Johnson.
sales.
So just so you know, we're Allison Johnson fans.
Now she's fantastic, and I will always give her kudos for her patience and support in working with us as we work to figure that out, right? But we did get there. The first few deals come through, then people start to understand the EDP, the drawdown, all the things that you guys have talked about at length that we probably don't need to get into here, and the floodgates open, right? We saw that business go from literally, I think we had done one or two private offers to $100 million run rate business in 18 months. I mean, it was off to the races. I would argue maybe scaled faster than was helpful sometimes, but that it became very clear, very evident that this was a model that wasn't going to go away. It was a great avenue for us to build our partnership with AWS, but was also great for our teams. I can pause there and see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I can segue that into my relationship with the Silver Fox.
That's what I'm here for. Is like, how did you get in? Like, were you guys at a grocery store together and you were reaching for the same orange and you looked into each other's eyes and Silver Fox was like, Trevor, I need you to come work with me. Is that how it happened, or?
It was a recruiter, pretty close.
Yeah, no, I wish that's how it went, Barless. I think it was only 25 interviews I had to go through to finally break in, but it was. So we were introduced by a recruiter, and I think a lot of that experience at Palo was awesome to see the marketplace business grow. But there's so much more that goes into these partnerships, right? Than just executing on marketplace. And the idea is if you can go to a high growth company, right, that's relatively early stage with a great product and start to weave this into the DNA of the business, that's awesome. And connected with Mike, a number of other folks, but it was pretty clear that Mike got it and he understood. I didn't know the extent to what he understood until I finally came on board after my 25 or 26 interviews. But no, it was a lot of deep discussions, and came in full of ambition, or like ready to build this thing from the ground up. And about a week in, I realized Mike did all the hard work. It's already done. And it was I was in my head, I was like, I'm the only guy on the planet that knows how to do this. And I don't think there was a ton more, but Mike was the guy. I came on board, the foundation was already built, right? All the hard work of getting teams buy-in, getting the marketplace rhythms in place, the co-sell motions. I quickly realized this wasn't a building operation, it was the scale of it. And Mike, never seen anybody pick something like this up so quick in my life, but it became pretty clear, like we were on the same page, not without some disagreements along the way, but the same page in terms of what we were trying to do. And for me, I was able to come in and foundation that Mike was built and just kind of be an extension of him and the team and really start to help scale this partnership with AWS at Lacework. And I did some pretty awesome things. Like not me, the team, you.
I'll say, number one, thank you. Number two, like, remember, I had already started with Lacework as employee 68. And I'm there for like a year, just trying to bake, like partnering with AWS and the, 3 C's, or now I call them the 5 C's, into this and trying to make things go. And then, you're right. It was at the time I'm hiring someone. My whole East Coast is not being covered by anyone. So it's like, I need more help. So I get the headcount to help. The timing works out perfect. The recruiter that I know and I've used in the past, I've been on their podcast before. It's called Hunters and Unicorns. Like, they're great. Go talk to the soap guys. But Trevor comes along. Number one, Palo Alto is a phenomenal AWS partner. Like, they get this, they fire on full cylinders, but they have a really big business and they sell a lot of things other than just Prisma Cloud and cloud security stuff. So in many ways, our conversations were like, hey, here's what I'm doing. And it was awesome just to validate what I thought was right and what we were doing with someone who had already done it at 9-figure scale, right? And I think that was a lot of the original synergy, because I was learning while I was interviewing, not that I was like stealing information, but in all these interviews, I'm just asking questions and I'm understanding if they understand what and why we're doing any of this stuff, why does it make sense? And it worked out that it was a good synergy and a good fit. And to what Trevor said, like, I encourage argument. Like, we argue a bunch, but like, that also means I'm listening, because I could be wrong. And I have no, in general, I could be completely wrong. Someone tell me otherwise. I have an opinion in most things, and I have a strong opinion, but I don't know everything. And he had seen scale and
Be a great
challenges and
recording.
opportunities that we had never seen before. So in many ways, I would say like that was kind of the story, and then you joined on. But I think, and we'll get into it, but like I knew your longer term goal was how do I go do like what Michael did like the first year at Lacework, and you and I had always been pretty open and transparent and honest about that, right? And I think as a leader, that was part of me helping you through this process.
Ask you this question, Michael. So when you were looking at Trevor, and this is a good thing for many leaders in the CAD world, when you were doing what you need to do to become a partner with AWS, and you were learning, hiring somebody from a company that had already kind of done and gotten to a level that you are trying to aspire Laceworks to be on the same like revenue model and number of business operations that that Prisma Cloud and Palo was doing. So hiring somebody like Trevor to come in and kind of work backwards and say, are we doing the same? Are we on the right trajectory? Are you guys doing this? We're going there. So having Trevor give you that extra kind of like, this is where we want to be, and this is my kind of validation that we are going in the same direction, and Trevor doing quality control to make sure that you are there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm basically, I think we've laid out for anyone what a good partnership with AWS looks like and the metrics that matter and the things that you have to do. Well, a lot of that is scale. And there's only so much one person can do or two people can do, or even with the tools and tech like automation, like our partners at Tackle and Sugar and Ibera Labs and WorkSpan, we've talked about all of them. It's still there, you have to implement them, and even that automation still requires like guidance in process. So point being is you just reach a point where there's only so much someone can do, and then what you're starting to look at is how do I multiply that effort? Or for me, I needed someone closer to the east or EMEA or somewhere else because I can't work all hours of the day. So you start to spread this thing out. So first and foremost, it was like, I always look for who can take what we have and at least sustain the foundation, the important things, but then also who can grow this and take it to the next level. And I don't know if you remember, Trevor, but I vividly remembered, like, it wasn't on purpose, but also Palo's a competitor. So I do kind of kill two birds with one stone when I hire someone from a competitor. But I just remember saying and remember talking like it's hard. I've worked for big companies. Remember, I worked for like an EMC and RSA where you have multiple products and the sales teams and the GAMs are kind of all, they can't be experts in everything. And I remember a lot of this was just like, well, what if you could do a cloud native SaaS from a cloud native company built on AWS, and all you're doing is just like aligning the best practices of what you're already doing at Palo, but now you have leadership and the sellers and everyone else who's kind of swimming the same direction. Doesn't that sound appealing? And I remember you and I talking a lot about that too early on.
I think that's a huge part of it, right? And I know you guys have talked at length in prior podcasts, but getting leadership on board it's so foundational. And the fact that Mike, when I say Mike did that hard work, right, setting the vision and setting the stage and having those internal conversations and making sure the right expectations were in place. I mean, you can do all of the right things in the world, you can have all the best ideas, but if you don't have that foundation and that executive alignment, that top-down support, you're not going to get very far. I think that was a huge part of it. And then it was really come in like, let's execute on these ideas and let's go make some stuff happen and test these theories. And a lot of them proved to be right. But I couldn't agree more, Mike.
Yeah, and
yeah. So
I also like what Trevor said earlier about if AWS isn't weaved into the DNA of your company, it's going to be a lot tougher to make that happen. I think I've heard that phrase in different ways, but I really like the way that's phrased. But I think that's it, right? Your leadership has to be bought in that not only is AWS like, yes, they're going to make us some money, but we really need to understand how AWS is getting paid. We need to have like an understanding that this is going to take a minute to get to that point, that we're not going to be instant, that just because we're giving, all this time and information into AWS, that it's instantly going to be, making money. And I think that having that DNA woven into the AWS portion being woven into the DNA, I think that's a great way of looking at it. So yeah,
Well, just
I
break down co-sell, co-build, co-market. If you think of it, co-sell is a blend of sales, your pipeline, and marketplace. So you're actually blending things that the CRO cares about, or wherever ops rolls up in your org. It might be the CFO, might be a COO. Like that's one tower of leaders and politics and fighting that could happen. Co-market, same thing. It's rolling up to the CMO. Just because you have this partnership doesn't naturally mean that they're going to be leaned in, that someone's going to support you from the partner marketing side. And same with co-build. That's by far the most beneficial, but also the hardest. And that's going to roll up to CTOs, CIOs, and all of that rolls up to the CEO, who has a little bit of command and control. So there's nothing saying that any of them are buying into this until they see something, and they might be trying to look at that lens of that partnership, or think of AWS as like a channel partner, like some of their other disties or partners, and have a different set of expectations. It's really hard. It's really hard for someone like a CAD in our place to just walk into a company where there's this big business and they're already doing something. And even for me on the outside looking in, companies like Okta and our peers over there, I know Maureen and I know Henry, I know a lot of people, like they literally went from like billion-dollar company, no AWS partnership, to like a year or two later being a top partner. And that's really hard to move that much stuff in a big company. If a small company, hopefully you can start to build this as an ingredient in the birthday cake, I like to say it. But you do need alignment from a lot of people. That's probably the most important thing to make the partnership kind of start to spin faster and faster.
Yeah. Well, and even stepping back, some of the things that I think, if you look at our vertical motions and some of the things that we did that had great outcomes, right? Like having Mike in a position where he's managing the partnership, like getting the buy-in that we need, it also enables, the people on his team to be creative and flexible and strategic. And, when we ran that vertical marketing campaign, for better or worse, maybe not the right way to do it, but if, I could go focus on the execution. And if we had roadblocks, going back to Mike and helping get those removed, that's a big part of it, right? When you start to get more cross-functional, and that might be a separate conversation, but I think being in lockstep there was a big, big part of it.
Yeah. So just to kind of keep things rolling, and obviously, like, I think while we don't bring it out, there's a lot of things about leadership and like selling. I mean, some of the more common questions I get asked by CAD members or just out in events and stuff is like, how do I sell my CFO on marketplace, or how do I it's a lot of those questions. It's not what everyone can read the textbook and they say, oh, you should do all these things, but it's how, and how do you engage with those leaders, or how do you convince someone that this makes sense for them? That's really hard. And I think we get into that in little bits and pieces throughout our guests and just kind of experiences. But like I said, just to kind of keep things rolling. So okay, you spend some time at Lacework, a couple of years, right? You see Palo, you see Lacework, right? You've had some experiences here, and then now you're over at Securiti. So what do you do? How'd you get there? And it's been what, under a year now. So how's it going? Yeah.
Now we're still, still very early in, right? And I say early, relative to having to be my positioning point here. But we're going through a lot of the things I have to assume that you went through, in year one at Lacework. And the best way is it's the enablement, right? It's the understanding across the business of, hey, to do this, to get that, right? And it's going to take time. It's going to be a process. And you just got to continue to chip away at it, right? I think, through the interview process and through early conversations, and, we have a phenomenal CEO, Rehan, he's very hands-on. I have a direct line of open communication with him, which is invaluable, but it's really setting the stage for the parameter and realizing it's going to be a few months before we're getting full returns. That getting that expectation in place was really important, and that's given me the flexibility.
So let me pause you, because I know people want to hear this. So you get started. There's a little bit of a AWS partnership. I think you guys had just got into ISV Accelerate, and then now you come in to just like not think about all things channel and all things, but just like, hey, here's our CSP partnership focus. you have a line of sight, CEO, CRO, they're all part of your interview process, but you have line of sight to that. What are the expectations and the conversations you're having with the CEO? What's important to him, and what are those kind of like, how are you starting to land those initial expectations? Because the real challenge is if they expect something that's probably not achievable, or when those are mismatched, that's where CADs get into trouble. It's where like a lot of bad things end up happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be the most important part of the early stage part of it. So the CEO relationship is critical, but you also have the CFO and the VP of sales, sorry, the CRO and the VP of sales, and then you have the CFO, and they're all different conversations, and they all have different expectations of what they want to see or get done, right? I think straddling that line between the CEO conversation and adding value to the business, and keeping our CRO happy, right? That's a really important conversation to have, and that's the expectations that need to be set, right? There's a lot of ways to deliver immediate value on the sales side, but I look back to our biggest wins from a co-sell perspective. That all came after chipping away at certain areas of the business for a long period of time. So having that conversation up front and setting those expectations on the CRO side has been really, really important, and helps level set the business. On the CEO side, go ahead, Mike. I see a question coming.
No, I was just going to say, so like if you had to say, what's the one thing that you wanted the CEO to take away? What was the one thing that you wanted the CRO to take away? What was the one thing that you wanted the VP to take away? Or in this case, your own boss, like she runs all channels, all things, like what like, a lot of times when there's multiple conversations and actions, but like if there was one rock that you're like, I want, this is what I want my CEO to think about what I'm going to do in kind of this initial, like where we are.
And I can say, so I think, you see a lot of Lacework, MedPick organizations, incredibly well run, incredibly thorough, and incredibly, by the box. You got to be doing the right activities to get the right outputs, right? And I really do believe you hit a certain point of scale in these partnerships where there are very clear activities you put in and do it the right way, you're going to get back out. But in the building phase, it's not that black and white, and you need to have the flexibility to kind of seize opportunities as they come up and not get put into a box. But you're still going to have things that you're measured on, right? You're still going to have outputs that you need to achieve. I think one of the biggest conversations we've had is, making sure that we're setting metrics, goals, and outcomes that aren't going to create a box that doesn't exist yet. And that conversation's always ongoing. But I think we've gotten there through lots of different examples, but it's the holistic approach. If you're rolling into a CRO, there's going to be sales metrics, and that's what they're going to care about, and that's how the lens of the business is going to work or measure you on. If you can't get out from under that, it's going to be tough to build a partnership the way you want, in the right way, and avoid unnatural behaviors because you're not in a position to ask for those yet. So I think, if I talked about one ask from the CRO, it's that, right? It's understanding that we're going to have to do X, Y, Z, and D and E and F before we can start building out a scalable model where we're analyzing day-to-day metrics and all these things that really, really matter, but might not be the most important thing right now. And I think with the CEO, it's being on the same page from the holistic perspective, that co-build, co-sell, co-market. And then I think the other big thing is the resource aspect of things. So, Mike, when I was at Lacework, a lot of this stuff had already been built out, right? You working with the product teams, and then, having the Tech Alliance team come on board, that's a heck of a lot easier, right? Than working across the business to get things done. So it's making sure that we're allocating resources appropriately, but you're doing it within the confines of the business goals, right? You gotta, and I think this is starting at any company, not just in an AWS role, but you got to understand the business and what you're trying to accomplish before you come in and start making a bunch of asks. So, setting clear goals and outcomes and getting cross-functional teams on board, but, doing it in a way that's aligned to business goals. I think that's what we're continuing to flesh out, but has been most important early on.
Cool. Yep. Yeah. I always like simple terms. Like, I think my relationship with the CEO is about, are you aware of what we're doing? Can I make sure that you have the right executive relationships? And can you not stop the momentum or block anything that I'm trying to do? Because I have the goals of the business in mind for what we're trying to do. And then, like everyone else, he represents the ultimate economic buyer. It's always, if something's broken or I'm stuck, do I have the right to like ask you for help? And can you help me unblock something, right? Or
100%.
accelerate something? I think that's like a CEO thing, the CRO thing. It's kind of the same. It's like, we just got a new CRO, and it's in many ways, it's like things are already good, but what I could use is, you mentioned the sales process. It doesn't matter what sales process you have, but like the more I can get you to govern that sales process and kind of keep the train on the tracks and at the right times, like we'll just keep accelerating and helping move that train down the line. And the same thing, like if I get stuck or someone underneath you disagrees with what we're doing, do I have, can I always reach out to you and have you like push someone or like help me escalate something? I think with a lot of that C-level, can't ask them to do anything that they don't want to do, but I have to, you're right, understand what's important to them. And then I'm leveraging the gifts that we bring and the value that we bring to the business and just trying to make sure they're aware and they're not going to, they're not going to fight it. And if they are, like a CFO, cool, then I'd rather just get that out in the open and just understand what the rules of the game are that we're playing so that I can like navigate my way around it.
Could not agree more. And I think, what helps that conversation a lot too is generating early wins. And, every situation is going to be unique, but I look at our CRO and CEO and we understand, what we're trying to do as a business, the things that they want. You can get things from AWS early on in a partnership. You have to be strategic about it, but let's make sure we get those early wins to help build this bigger picture. And I don't know if we want to get into the big specifics, but the more you can figure out what they care about and get the CSPs aligned to that in small ways early on, in small little wins, it goes a long way towards opening doors and getting lean in. And one more thing I would add on the CEO note, Mike, is this hasn't been an issue for me because Rehan's fully leaned in, but access to certain folks at AWS or the cloud provider, it gets a heck of a lot easier when it's your CEO instead of you. And having them on board or open to taking those meetings and leaning in, I mean, if anything's accelerated our partnership faster, it's that, right? Having the willingness from our CEO and CRO to get their hands dirty a little bit, or just come in open with that partnership perspective, it's huge, right? So early on, my experiences, speaking from that, that executive alignment is just critical.
Let me throw something in here, if that's okay. So
yeah.
When we're dealing with our membership at Caddyshack, we have some of the similar questions around CROs. And with CROs, do you guys, and this is a question to either one of you, do you guys think that having a CRO hired for clouds, like a cloud objective, is key to being successful for a cloud business? And the reason I'm asking is because many CEOs hire CROs to close sales, not necessarily to close cloud sales. And there's a little bit of a difference, right? Like it
depends on the business.
Yeah, it does depend on the business, I think.
I can give you 3 or 4 examples where people, I was chatting with one today where like the business was primarily a software company that was, the bulk of their customers are on-prem, and then they built a cloud version, a SaaS version. And so in many cases, maybe it's not the CRO, but there are different sales leaders, and there might be a sales leader that's more focused on the sales business, and they might have both like sales reps for that SaaS thing, like overlays, or even just reps themselves with numbers and quotas and targets. And they might also have alliances folks under, like in that same org, that are working on partnership programs, tactics, sales plays, stuff like that. If you're just, if you were a cloud native, digital native business and all you have is a cloud backend and all you do is sell, depending on what you sell and who your customers are, it may or may not make sense. So that's my opinion. It just kind of depends on the company. And I know I have what I would call peers, and some of those peers are running sales teams too. And
Well,
some of them are just running alliance teams. And
I
then
think
some have completely hybrided their alliance and channel teams into like different layers too. So there isn't a right or wrong answer. I think every team is kind of evolved based on their business, based on their customer, based on, you know, where the cloud intersects with that. I don't know if there's a hard, fast answer.
let me ask you this question, and once again to both of you guys. Yeah, I agree with you on that. But the question that I have is maybe a little bit more this. I see a lot of CROs and their only focus is sales, right? We got to close business. We got to close business. We got to close business. And they take the same sales cycle, the same growth that they have in their software business or their on-prem business. And they're like, right, we have to do the same thing in cloud. And if it's not doing that, cloud is not successful. They didn't close this much business, or we don't have this trajectory of growth. And I think there should be a difference. I think that there should be a difference in the way that you're handling your traditional software, close the business, onto the next software, close the business. Like the way you handle hyperscaler and especially AWS business is a lot more of a long tail in the beginning, and it's not as much activity. 50 POCs equals 25 closes equals that. I mean, there's other things involved. What do you think about?
I'll give you an example and a Caddyshack member, Jack Anderson at Databricks, right? Jack was an enterprise sales leader at AWS before he went to Databricks. He manages the relationship, obviously, with AWS, but also he's running a lot of cloud sales for Databricks too. So, I mean, like, I'd call him, you know, again, not CRO, but he's a sales leader in the company, has a big stake in that. And they for their business, run a slightly different, you know, cloud sales thing than, let's say, their other sales, or where maybe some of their other revenue comes from. So again, when I think about these things, it just depends on the business and what makes sense. I won't interject a question, but like what I hear more often is, should our function roll into revenue, CRO, or roll into technology like CTO or COO? That's the question you and I get asked a lot more and more.
Yeah.
So,
and
what
I
do you
know
think, Trevor? You've seen a bunch of this.
About the same question.
I'm going to give the most direct non-answer possible, but I really do think it is situational, right? And, you know, the conversations that we have at Lace Work all the time, Mike, right? We had tons of activity across the board, and there were things that mattered a lot, you know, for a 9 to 12 month period that mattered less for the trailing 12-month period. And we had to shift our goals. I think, you know, easier said than done, but to grow an AWS partnership effectively, you're going to have to pull the right strings at the right time. And there's certain behaviors and certain things that are going to matter more early on than they will later on, and vice versa, right? And I think we saw that, you know, going back to the level of co-sell activity and marketplace versus the shift to co-build and certain immersion days, right? It depends where you're at and the kind of mind share you're looking to get. And then back to Mike's point about who you roll into, it's critical. Like if you're rolling under sales, it's going to dictate and change a lot of the behavior that you're doing day to day and the things that you're focused on. And, you know, you can have the same kind of in your head goals for the partnership, but the reality is when you have a number, right, and you're being measured and you're being held accountable to certain metrics on the sales side, it's going to, you know, there's probably going to be an impact on the co-build, co-sales. I say it's, if there's a team and a structure in place and folks who have the ability to focus on that without impacting other parts of the partnership, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're at a certain point of scale. If, you know, you're a one-man band and you're looking to build a holistic partnership, there's certain things that, you know, aren't going to be as impactful or aren't the right things to measure or spend your time focused on. But who you roll up to, I think that's that's going to dictate a lot of your life and, you know, where your partnership goes from an AWS perspective.
And that's what we recommend to a lot of Caddyshackers, or at least I do anyway. You know, I see Megan Buntain, one of our successful members. She rolls to CTO, and her goals are to build a co-build relationship with AWS in the way that, you know, they're using AWS products. They're ingesting it in a certain way. They're using AWS partners because it's a holistic kind of measurable technology But when you start having people like Ryan Norton told me a long time ago, Ryan, sorry for telling your secret, but when Ryan Norton was telling me about, why he doesn't accept the revenue goal when he goes to a company is because, look, as an alliance director, I get to meet all of the AWS salespeople, and I'm going to be best friends with your sales team. And I'm going to go to your sales team, and every deal that you close, I'm going to be like, hey, dude, I'm here. I'm shaking your hand. This happened because of alliances, right? Yes. All right. And then it's going to be a popularity contest of, if sales likes you and they add, yes, alliance helped me, I make my number without even doing anything. But if my number isn't based off of how many sales I can attach my name to, if your number is based off of how many times am I standing in front of a AWS sales team, how many leads am I bringing that are qualified into the mix, how many times have we been in front of AWS senior managers, things like that, I think, are a lot more indicator of a successful CAD rather than a popularity contest between your salespeople and him or her.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, so my opinion to this, because I came up through sales.
I know.
I
We
never
differ a
want
little
to
bit
work
on
at a
this one.
company. I always want to work under revenue. I always want to touch money. I always want to be on the profit side versus the cost side of the P&L. Like I want to always be touching revenue. Now, what you have to balance is, no giveaways here. AWS isn't the greatest source of source business. So there has to be something else that's giving that. And early on, when it's small and you're trying to add value to the business and you roll up to revenue, then yes, it's about, influencing your pipeline and closing your pipeline faster. And, in this case, marketplace deals were 30% bigger than our non-marketplace deals. And so I was selling that and like pushing through marketplace while you're building the partnership. But co-sell is where you're spending a lot of your time, because my opinion is it's the most value of all of the C's in the partnership, but it's where you're spending your time. But it's also because you're tied to revenue and you are part of the revenue team. However, I straddle the entire company and all the other lines of business. And so then I think when I started to hire a team, and Trevor knows this, and like my analogy, and I told them never take it personal, but it's like you are my honeybees. Like if you're doing anything other than going from the hive back to the, flower and making honey, then let me know, because I need to like speed you guys up. I need to speed the team up, or there's something blocking you politically, operationally, or whatever. So then for me, I have a big number. I don't chase my number. I can't. I have to prioritize co-build and co-market and all these other things. But my team is the one who's actually making honey and chasing the goals, because we are part of the revenue.
So Barless, Mike has the best of both worlds, but I couldn't agree, because what you just said, I think hits the nail on the head. Like where we're at from a scale, I can't spend all day every day focused fully. We're not going to accomplish what we want, and there's going to be a cap on our AWS partnership at some point. But what you were able to do, Mike, is, okay, you built this foundation, you still focus in other areas, but you built the co-sell, the co-market foundation, right? And then as you built a team, you stayed attached to that revenue number, and we made a big impact on it. But it also allowed you to take the holistic look at the partnership, all of the little things that really, really, really matter, and keep driving the business forward while we did the influence component. And all, we talk about AWS being, a poor generator. I think it's true to a degree, but I also just think it's, if you look at the reality of the business, I mean, it's a massive, massive organization. Each segment operates differently. Your DNB is different than ISV, than startup, right? But when you have somebody on the sales side that can put that level of focus and connect the dots, that's where you get great outcomes. And I use this anecdote all the time because it almost brought a tear to my eye that, hey, if you do this the right way, it can happen. But we had we were working with a startup rep on a relatively small deal in New York City. And because it was a startup rep, they had a broader geography, right? But worked with them, we partnered the right way. There's enablement, takes the deal through marketplace. We know that bucket, right? Has a great experience working with us. We get the win. He understands our technology a little bit better. Good. Like that's a positive relationship. That person's saying good things about us internally. Fast forward, same AWS rep, different account, DC still. They had like 50 accounts, kind of, I think it was New York, DC, Chicago. Same thing, relatively small deal. And I say relative, I think it was under 100K, like it's somewhere in that area. We partner the right way, and that goes down enablement. We take the deal through marketplace. That's what we want from a business perspective. Now this AWS rep is looking at us like, who the heck are these guys? They just closed 2 accounts, took 2 marketplaces. For a startup, this is impactful. He walked us into an account in Chicago that closed within 6 weeks in the quarter, over $1 million TCV, right? That pure AWS source as AWS source can be, right? But from our side of the house, you got to understand the only way that dot connects is if you understand who you're talking to and leveraging each of those wins that you're getting and realizing the internal dynamics. Because if you just let that go, or you just wrap it up and carry on and don't maintain that relationship, you're never going to get those sorts of things. So it does take a person with that level of focus, but you almost have to have a team to be able to do that across a company as big as AWS. And I think that was the part of the formula where the revenue really, really matters, because you're not going to get that without that level of focus. But you can't let that level of focus prevent you from, the code, all the other activities that really, really matter.
And I would say too, for that story, because Trevor and I know exactly this story, for that story, there's also 99 other examples where we did a deal and then we got nothing out of it. We never really built a relationship. Like I can't materialist say that it was like, it worked, but I do know for sure, and startup's a good example, like their culture and those reps are pretty happy, and that's pretty impactful and meaningful. So the same thing, Barless, as a rep, this every year, you got some of the same accounts, mostly new accounts, and you had to go do something different with them. Like there's several examples, but that same rep, when they get their new accounts, they're like, "Ooh, where can I get Lacework in?" And they start like, "Who can I like?" They already start thinking about their growth strategy in these accounts with us as a trusted partner. Right. And that's what you want. That's like, if you can do that with 1 rep and then 2 and then 4 and then 8, and then like, that's where this stuff becomes impactful. And Trevor and I have seen this now. I've seen it for almost 4 years of just, that's why I always say co-sell. I mean, it's a thing you can probably control, and it is the base. Like I will never not do that. It's hard. You have to be in the details, but it is the most important. And this because Caddyshack members ask us all the time, like, how do I get into ISV Accelerator? How do I whatever? I said, very simple. Pipeline revenue, like, co-sell revenue and marketplace revenue. Everything else at the beginning is noise.
Yeah, well, even ISVA, and sorry, AWS, but ISVA and all the programs are really just noise. The end of the day, we all know how to be
how do you really feel
with AWS. If you bring AWS money, you're going to be successful with AWS. I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah. But that's the way the world is, right? Like if I hand you $5,000, you're probably going to like me more than the guy that doesn't hand you $5,000, right? It's just the way it is. But I want us to put a cap on, because we could be talking about this for years, and this has been a lot of information. I really want to give security a chance to kind of, if you can, Trevor, if you can give us a little bit of an overview, or as long as you want, really, of what security does and how it makes AWS customers successful, because I'd like to make sure that, security gets a chance to give this information out to all of our listeners as well, if that's okay.
No, I'm glad. I didn't know if the vest plus the background was too much of a plug and I would just lost my slot, but I'm happy to. And I'm right now, no stump to chump. I know we got 2 technical guys on here, so hey, I'm still relatively new before we get into the technical minutia. But I think if you think about security, I guess the first thing I would ask is if I know a lot of our listeners aren't, but are either of you familiar with the technology?
I am. Yeah,
I am.
Okay. So it's very interesting. I think at the highest level, you think of security as a data command center, right? And how you think about a SOC for security professionals. I think about this as a SOC for your critical and sensitive data,
and
right?
Let me just also tell you that because some of our listeners are not, security folks, when we're talking about using abbreviations, we like to make sure that something that you wouldn't even think of, SOC. Security Operations Center, if you can just make sure that we're using as little abbreviations as possible, because not everyone is a security person. Sorry.
Yeah, so SOC, Security Operations Center. That was a good call out. That's when you're getting too deep into a particular industry, just not even awareness of that. But so Security Operations Center, right? And if you think about the purpose of that is a way for security professionals to really, manage and all the security analytics and all the tools that you have. How do you have this centralized way to manage it? And that's what we're doing from a data perspective, right? Enabling the safe use of data and Gen AI. And if you think, about the big driver and need for this solution, it really centers around a few things. One, right, this massive growth in data itself, but also the rapidly growing number of services and systems companies are using to generate that data. So if you think about the cloud providers, obviously AWS, that's one piece, but also on-prem, right? Private data centers, and then all of the SaaS solutions that companies are using, right? There's an insane amount of data that's being generated. And what a lot of organizations are really being challenged with right now is providing a unified approach to managing and understanding that data, right? And then putting the proper controls in place for all of these disparate cloud, on-prem, and SaaS technologies. It's a very real challenge. And if it's not addressed, right, there's big implications. When companies can't do this, they don't have the ability to control and manage the data. It's going to inhibit their ability to fulfill critical obligations. So you think about, identifying and securing sensitive data, addressing consumer privacy rights, right? Governing access to that data, and then complying with global data regulations. These are all, very important things and things that are becoming more impactful. As you look at GDPR, now each state having their own policies, more and more consumers are asking for requests and, hey, Mr. Company, how are you using my data? And that company is obligated not just to understand where that data is and find it, but also have a workflow in place to meet that request within a set time frame. So that's what Securiti is doing. It's providing a unified data intelligence and controls platform across these hybrid and multi-cloud environments. And if you look at the market today, Capital One, Cisco, Chipotle, ADP, I mean, we're talking massive Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies. They've all adopted Securiti's Data Command Center to provide them with that common control and management plane. And that enables them to address all of those various obligations across things like data security, data governance, compliance, and privacy, and then do that in a consistent manner. So that's the highest level, skinny, of what we're looking to do. DSPM is kind of the buzzword. We talk about security and cloud security posture management, DSPM being data security posture management. Now what's also unique, so you have the DSPM element, right? So you're discovering that data, but then there's a big privacy component. What I just said about, a DSR request, which stands for data subject request. Every single state, just about every country now has increasing regulations. This all started with GDPR, and consumers have more and more rights. And companies have to be accountable to how they're using this data and sharing that back with customers. And there's huge fines, there's huge implications if they don't. So there's a lot of value add just on the data discovery piece, and probably 6 or 7 different use cases we could get into there. But then there's this whole privacy component, right, where we're also solving problems. So it's this unique intersection of those two areas. And the reason we're seeing a lot of success, particularly within the Fortune 500, is these companies with lots of consumer data. That could be healthcare and financial services, actually, but you also have retail, all of that consumer data, airlines, all of that consumer data. They're under a lot of pressure to understand where this data is and make sure it's secure, and especially as consumer rights continue to increase. But back to my note on these large organizations, you're seeing this bridge between the CISO and then the Chief Information Security Officer, Barless, I'm catching myself there, but also the CDO, the Chief Data Officer, and the CPO, the Chief Privacy Officer. And there's these new data security groups being formed within them. And our solution really is at the intersection of that data security group, right? Bringing together those 3 different branches to solve a number of different problems. But it really starts with the data discovery. And then there's a number of use cases you can get into from there.
So I'll bring it back to everything you said is exactly how you'd speak to a customer, why Securiti, what you guys do, the personas you sell to. Now, flip that if you think about AWS, that stuff kind of went over their head. So like, how are you taking that and then in, let's say, a co-sell conversation, or what an AWS seller's up to with their accounts, how are you bridging that gap? What's your, what's that pitch to the AWS seller? Why do they care?
He's asking what the AWS superpower is, what they care about when you talk to them.
And I know the AWS superpower is a huge part of everybody's formula. I am going to step back and say it is a little unique. And I say that because,
Yeah.
you could do a quick search on our website and there's no less than 15 different use cases that you can provide. And each of those customers I just named, Capital One, Cisco, ADP, every single one is using us for a different use case with plans to expand into different areas. So each of our conversations is unique. Now, once you get into those, there's a separate superpower conversation in each. I would think about.
Well, I guess like what I was going to say is like and Barless knows this first person, right? An AWS account manager, obviously leadership, they're working backwards from the customer obsession and what they're trying to do with that customer. But at the end of the day, they are managing an account and their own personal goals, and they're being held accountable to growing consumption and helping that customer grow. So that at the end of the day is the value driver that they're having to serve. Like, how are you guys helping connect the dots with that?
So I will say, if you think about migration modernization, two things that we know AWS cares a lot about. Let's step back to security. This isn't just a cloud solution, right? So Amazon has Macy for their native tooling, but there's still third-party services, right, outside of, and first-party services outside of S3 that Macy isn't going to capture. But that's just AWS, right? That's MongoDB running in AWS, not being captured. You talk about Salesforce, Workday, all of those different instances, pulling that in as well. But the creme de la creme, right, is that on-prem data, right, also being pulled into this platform. When you talk about companies trying to move to the cloud or trying to innovate and AWS teams trying to support them, that's a big value add. And I'll use one quick example. There's an organization called the AWS Security Assurances Services Organization, but they're technically a subsidiary. It's part of AWS, but their entire job is, helping customers that are looking to move to AWS meet compliance regulations. And you would think most of the conversations that team is having is with compliance teams or with, privacy officers, or they're working with DevOps teams and engineers teams because these are business outcomes. So they work with us for assessments to get those. A lot of these teams, they're not going to move to the cloud until they know what sensitive data is there, what's in place. In that, they have the frameworks and controls in place to make sure they're not breaking any rules along the way. There's a whole other Gen AI story that I am not equipped to tell, but I would, implore you to go check out our AWS Startup Showcase video. Maybe we can put it in the links, and you can see our CEO talk about how this relates to Gen AI. It's a lot of the same use cases in getting that data, right? If you think about
it's another place of data, LLMs, just like a database. Yeah.
Listen, whatever data goes in, at some point, it's going to come out, right? So you got to make sure that data that's going into those models isn't sensitive, isn't classified, or if it is, that it's clearly tagged, because there's a lot of issues that can be in play there. And there's a number of other use cases in that area, but I think I'm rambling a bit at this point, so we'll wrap up.
I think we need to. We're coming up on the end of this because I think we've gone way over on time. But I'll let you finish it up, Michael. Trevor, thank you so much for coming and joining us. Michael,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this kind of brings the show to an end. I think we talk about a lot of things here, and I think we've explored different areas. And again, it's like, I think the real intent here is just how does each one of us take kind of the foundation and the principles. And in this case, what we're going to try to do is bring a lot of those basic foundation and principles to a test, to a certification to help others like us, and also differentiate yourself from your peers. But as you can tell, what you do, how you do it, what industry you're in, it all apply. You have to. That's the gift, is you have to apply these same principles. You have to apply the textbook in a totally different way in business. And so, with that, thank you, Trevor. And also, just like you've been doing this for now 3 companies, and you've seen scale, kind of that growth, and now startup. Like, what are the 3? If I whittled down 2 or 3 things, but like, what are your best practices? What would you encourage other CADs? Like, this is what I've learned in my, now it's been many, many years of me doing this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's, number 1 is executive alignment, top-down leadership, making sure that they're bought in. Number 2 is enablement, and enablement probably repeated 5 times because it's never ending, and it's the most important piece of the puzzle, because we can sit here and talk about all these ideas, but if we're not making this practical and usable and able to execute by people far a blast radius much bigger than ourselves, right, we're never going to accomplish what we're trying to do. And then I think number three is, this is really cliche, Mike, but it is value add. We talk about better together. AWS has no incentive to, they have some incentives, but you got to bring real value, right? Every success that we've really had, it's been a crystal clear, better together story that adds tangible value, and is helping these teams meet goals, right? At the end of the day, internally, externally, there's a sales element to this, and you have to be adding value to AWS, to your joint customers. They really care about that a lot too, customer obsession. But every little co-sell call, every marketplace deal, every interaction, it matters and it adds up at scale. Doing it the right way and bringing value to each of those, over time, good things are going to happen. So right there.
Couldn't have said it any better. I'm super pumped. I get to watch my my protege grow up and like conquer the world. This is awesome.
No, so, learn everything I know.
You're going to have a white beard and you're going to slick your hair back.
I've been trying. Someday it'll come in, but I will say, Barlis, Mike, obviously, Mike, to you, thanks for everything, my career, everything I've learned from you, putting me in a position to take a next step, very selfless move. And then for both of you, what you guys are doing here, right? This stuff didn't exist when I was banging my head against the wall at Palo trying to figure this stuff out along the way. Would have got myself out of a few fires if this stuff would have been around then. So it's awesome that you guys are doing this, and I appreciate you having me out.
Perfect way to cap the ending. So thank you everyone for joining us. This was episode 9. We'll be back. We're going to do these a lot more than we had been in the past. So thank you again.